Sokka and Zuko leaned the entirety of their weight against the ropes holding the sail as the wind ferociously attempted to wrench it from this side to that. As one particularly powerful gust of wind pulled at the abusive rope, Sokka yelped and made to drop it, to retreat into a small cabin like the fishermen and pray that the small ship would somehow survive. But Zuko didn't so much as falter. It is as though the laws of physics warped in response to his stubbornness. Though the wind should have far overpowered him, the boy simply refused to move, and nothing the rocking seas or the rushing wind did would tear him from his goal. Finally, the pair managed to force the sail into position just enough to make it so that the vessel was facing the waves instead of allowing the waves to hit the side of the ship. Sokka rushed to throw a makeshift storm anchor out the back of the boat, and the pair collapsed as much of the sail as they felt they safely could before dropping onto the deck, mostly sheltered by the cabin, but close enough to the workings of the ship to get to them in an instant if needed. Sokka let out a loud sigh in relief as he sat down. He couldn't help casting the other team an impressed look. Zuko was breathing very heavily, arms collapsed at his side as though he couldn't bear to move them. Kid was strong for someone who had been trapped in a cave. Sokka had known that, distinctly. He had seen him climb over the great divide like a mountain goat squirrel. But it was different here. This could not be attributed to flexibility or fitness. This was brute force and tenacity. "I can't believe we did it," he said, suddenly giddy with relief and wanting to share his sudden joy. Zuko cast him a soft, exhausted smile. "You, man, you just stuck with it. I swear that should not have worked, but you just kept going until it did. Awesome!" Zuko didn't say anything for several long moments, and Sokka was happy to sit in his relief, pelted by rain and constantly shifting to try and stay upright in the rolling boat. "Never give up without a fight," Zuko said suddenly. "Huh?" "When I was a kid, my uncle sent me a souvenir. It was a knife with the engraving, 'Never give up without a fight.'" Sokka snorted, then coughed when the motion sent rainwater up his nose. When he could breathe again, the boy said, "Wow, so you got like one present and were like, that's it, that's my life motto from now on." He laughed. It just fit Zuko so perfectly. This was a kid who'd been chained in a cave for literal years and still yelled at his captors. This was a boy with no stamina that practically ran himself into the ground to get to a gag pen and save it. "Not exactly," Zuko said, so softly that Sokka had to fight to hear it over the roaring of the waves, the wind, and the rain. "What do you mean?" Sokka asked, just as quietly. There was a heavy pressure in his chest, one that was entirely separate from the fear and the adrenaline that came from sitting in a storm. This was about to be a serious conversation. "One time, I didn't. I gave up without fighting. I'll never make that mistake again." Sokka didn't ask. He didn't look at the scar. He didn't push. Maybe that was why Zuko actually answered. Maybe it's because Sokka had freedom, and Zuko thought that only right that he had learned the truth that the freedom fighters had never bothered to ask. Maybe because it was on this rolling, rioting, flailing excuse for a boat. The next day did not seem certain, and Zuko wanted at least one person to know what had happened to him. Maybe it was simply the kind of storm that prompted people to huddle together and tell stories by the fire, and they were not exempt from this desire even out here on the waves. Back home, in the Fire Nation, Wait. There is truth, then there is stupidity. Zuko did not always think things through, but, well, when you were surrounded by people who talked endlessly about defeating the Fire Lord, it didn't take a genius to know that you shouldn't tell them that he was your father. He was giving truth tonight, but he was hoarding it as well, just as he had in the cave. He hoarded his identity, his inability to bend, his weakness. His people had learned from the dragons, and he knew how to hoard. Just as his father hoarded land and his sister hoarded praise, he would give some of his hoard away, but was keeping the brightest jewels for himself. "I belong to a noble family." Sokka snorted. "No duh." "What?" "I mean, that was kind of obvious." "No, how?" Your kind of whole deal? What's that supposed to mean?" he roared, his voice loud enough to be crystal clear over the deafening wind and waves. Nothing, nothing, Sokka said, and Zuko narrowed his eyes but decided to leave it. The moment was definitely ended, though. My family was extremely influential, and when I was around 10, there was an incident, and I personally found myself in a much more important position. He'd gone from 5th in line to the throne to 2nd, from never imagining himself sitting upon the flaming dais to being groomed to take over. That had been a lot. But I had a sister so close on his heels that they were blistered, a sister who was favored and who would very likely take over his destiny if he didn't fight for it. Wanted to prove myself. So when I was 13, I convinced Uncle to sneak me into a war council. He said he would, but made me promise to keep quiet. An impossible feat. Zuko should have known. If he had been anyone but Uncle, he would think that it had been intentionally sabotaged to get him in a position where he would have to hold his tongue. If Father was thinking, he probably would have done it long ago and had an excuse to, well, do exactly what he did. Not Uncle, though. He had always believed in Zuko far too much. I had trusted him, and Zuko had failed just as he failed everyone else. I'm guessing you weren't quiet, Sokka said softly as Zuko continued to be silent, lost in thought and self-incrimination. I couldn't. They were planning. It was horrible. And no one else was saying anything. I couldn't just let them. I couldn't. Sokka watched him with solemn eyes. Zuko wasn't sure what he was thinking. Was it something noble? Did he imagine Zuko had been there, been questioning the war? Was he imagining that Zuko was speaking out about imprisoning earthbenders, destroying crops, marching through poor towns? What would he say if he knew that Zuko had simply been protecting the lives of his people, of soldiers? Would he care that they were new recruits being sent to slaughter? I argued against the general in the middle of the meeting in front of the Fire Lord himself. The Fire Lord thought that it was an act of complete disrespect, and that my actions were shameful and without honor. He said that the only way to resolve it was through an Agni Kai, a fire duel. Oh, were you a good bender? No. I had the best masters in the land. I wasn't their best pupil, but I was confident that I could beat the general who made the suggestion. I guess he was better than you, though, Sokka said carefully, his eyes straying to the scar for the first time. Zuko let out a bark of laughter that was more pain than anything. I don't know. I'll never know. When I got to the arena, he wasn't my opponent. I had been disrespectful in the war room with the Fire Lord. When I made that challenge, I wasn't just disrespecting the general. You were disrespecting the Fire Lord, Sokka breathed, his voice full of wonder. You fought the Fire Lord? His voice squeaked at the end. No, I didn't. I never intended to fight the Fire Lord. I didn't want to. I was trying to. I was a loyal son. He wanted to be a loyal son, but he couldn't say that. I was loyal. I didn't want to fight my Fire Lord. You gave up without a fight, Sokka said softly, remembering the beginning of their conversation. I begged for mercy, but the Fire Lord has none. He burned me when I was on my knees, cut my face as if in comfort, and pain. Days and days of pain. He claimed that by refusing to fight, I showed extreme cowardice. He banished me, never returned to my family or home, never regained my honor. I was still injured when the boat ferried me, kicked me off. Jet found me a few days later, and you know the rest. Zuko's mouth suddenly went dry, so he couldn't bear to speak another word. He had never actually told anyone about this before. He wasn't sure how widespread the news had gotten after. Father would have tried to quiet it as much as possible, but there was something like this. It was hard to say how successful he might have been. He told his story, though, and while that did not change his circumstances, it somehow eased the pressure in his chest, just a bit. Taking a deep breath, the boy looked to the sky, watching the far-off haze of the moon attempting to penetrate through the thick clouds. His eyes narrowed when a spot of something passed in front of the moon. Was that? He wasn't about to think beyond that as a particularly high burst of wind and waves sent the ship careening, and he scrambled to hold onto something lest he be thrown overboard. Sokka eyed Zuko in the fierce wind, squinting against the rain that battered against his eyes. He wasn't sure what to take from this. On one hand, good news! The Fire Lord was an even worse person than they thought, and barbecued random kids for talking at inappropriate times. Side note, this was also even more incentive to keep Aang from the man at all costs, except in coming to defeat him kind of way. On the other hand, though, Zuko had made a point to say that he was loyal to the Fire Nation. He is loyal. Had been loyal? How deep does his loyalty go? Have they already said too much? Would Zuko betray him for his people? What does he consider honorable? Why had Sokka thought that spending years in prison by the Earth Kingdom would make him more eager to fight his people? But there was that bitterness he had whenever he spoke about the Fire Lord. There was the way he spoke about how the man had burned him, hurt him. Child. There was the way he didn't question helping the refugees through the canyon, despite knowing that they were running from his nation. Sokka opened his mouth to ask, because, hey, are you loyal to the Fire Nation or not, was a great friendship and trust-building conversation that they should definitely have when it would be easy to make his death look like an accident. But before he could say a word, a wave brought brackish water into his mouth. The teen altered between spitting out the water and clutching a part of the boat for dear life as the wave rocked it to and fro. Sokka! Zuko suddenly shouted, pointing to the sky. At first the Water Tribe teen didn't see anything. Then he did. Appa was swooping through the storm, diving to the boat. Get the fishermen! Zuko commanded as he fought the ropes once more, attempting to keep them aloft until the bison could arrive. Sokka ran into the small cabin, where the grumpy old man had huddled under a table, and pulled him out. The man yelled and attempted to protest, but Sokka barely heard as he forced him onto deck. Sokka pulled the man to the bow, which rose and fell with the waves. Zuko abandoned the ropes as Appa got closer and joined them. Appa lowered enough for Aang to drop on a rope, commanding them on the boat to grab on. Sokka grabbed the rope first, holding it steady for the old man and Zuko to grab. In a fierce burst of airbending, Aang utilized the natural winds around them to send the rope flying with a snap, arching it so that they would land the three figures safely in the saddle. At least, that was the idea. As soon as the rope crested its highest point, the movement, the rain, the coarse rope proved to be too much for the elderly man, and he lost his grip. The man went flying through the air, spitting curses at Aang as he went. No! Zuko shouted, immediately dropping the rope after him, with no regards for his health and personal safety. Zuko! Sokka yelled as he landed safely in the saddle. Aang yelped and sent wind once more to send the rope flying through the air. This time, Zuko grabbed it with one hand, the other wrapped around the old man's waist. By that point, the rope was half under water and had lost its momentum. Sokka and Katara had to pull them up as Aang fought to keep the bison from going under. Finally, they pulled a shaking Zuko and a shuddering man from the water. Sokka clapped him on the back with a grin. He still didn't know if the firebender was still loyal to the Fire Nation. He didn't even know if he was really for Aang. But he knew that he was a good person, and for the moment, that was enough. They could work on the other stuff. Sokka flashed a quick grin to his sister as they safely flew away. So, what did you and Aang get up to while we were gone? He asked, striving for a bit of normalcy after a night of near-death experiences and horrifying revelations. We just talked. And what did you talk about? She didn't answer. Sokka couldn't really blame her, though. He wouldn't have wanted to answer that question either.